Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris and you are watching NBC News Now. We are following three big stories in our country's fight against COVID-19. First, on Capitol Hill, the House has passed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. They did that this afternoon, delivering President Biden's first major legislative victory.
On this day, we celebrate because we are honoring a promise made by our president, and as we join with him in promising that help is on the way.
Second, President Biden hosting executives from Johnson & Johnson and Merck at the White House today, announcing a deal to buy 100 million more doses of the J&J vaccine. And third, in Texas, businesses are now open at full capacity. The state's mask mandate gone. We'll have more from the Lone Star State in just a bit. We start things off this hour, though, with NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, Democratic leaders celebrating the COVID relief vote at a ceremony this afternoon. What are they saying about the passage of this final bill?
Well, Allison, Democratic leaders are thrilled and elated about final passage of this bill. The House today sending it to President Biden's desk. They are particularly happy because public polling shows that the package is very popular, specifically provisions that are the best known: $1,400 stimulus check, $300 a week jobless benefits. There are lesser known provisions that also are quite popular to those who have heard of them, including a child allowance payment for parents of up to $3,600. And health insurance subsidies, including 100% COBRA coverage for people who've lost their jobs. So there's a lot in here that gets money directly into people's pockets. And I think that's one of the reasons that voters say they want it.
Sahil, if I understand the vote correctly, one Democrat voted against the bill. Who was it and why?
The one Democrat who voted against this bill was Jared Golden. He's a congressman from Maine. He said he has concerns with the size and scope of the package. He's not thrilled about the fact that Congress has to borrow and spend so much money to make it happen. He said he hoped for the stimulus payments to be more targeted and for fewer households to receive it. Interestingly, however, he said he does support a $15 minimum wage, one of the provisions that was stripped out of the package, and one of the few provisions that conservative or centrist Democrats did not like. So kind of an interesting vote here. He did, by the way, also vote against the first version of the COVID relief bill when it came around in the House last week.
Sahil, House Republicans ripped this relief package on the floor today. Here is co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, Tom Reed.
Let's be honest with the American people. You're playing politics. You're carrying forward an agenda. I get it. You won the election. But this is an emergency. This was a virus that killed our fellow American citizens. And we put together $4 trillion worth of relief to the American people on a bipartisan basis. We should have done it again, and you didn't. And it's wrong, and that's why I say no to this bill.
Sahil, if Congress has to work on another COVID relief bill, which they might, how much pressure is there to make this a bipartisan effort?
Enormous. I think a lot of the centrist Democrats who reluctantly went along with this particular package will be much more reluctant to go along with a major relief bill next time around that isn't bipartisan. It'll also be complicated for Democratic leaders to sell another major relief package when they said this is the one that's going to crush the virus. And they said this is the one that is, above and beyond what Republicans wanted to do, about 3 times the size of what moderate Republicans had suggested, which was about $600 billion. So this does kind of raise the stakes for Democrats, particularly when they didn't get Republican support, that this will complete the job in crushing the virus and bringing the economy back.
Sahil, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Republican Senator Susan Collins are fighting over the economic stimulus vote from 2009. That's right, I said 2009. I know it's been confusing with the calendar lately. During the pandemic, people aren't sure what day it is, but it is 2021. They're talking 2009. What's going on here?
This all started when Schumer was asked yesterday when he was on CNN essentially whether he could have done more to win Republican support for this $1.9 trillion package. His response was an emphatic no, and he mentioned Susan Collins specifically as one of the Republicans back in 2009 who convinced Democrats to shrink the size of their stimulus package. And in Schumer's retelling of history, it was inadequate for the job, and voters punished Democrats because they didn't do a sufficiently good job of delivering relief. Schumer has said almost daily as part of this COVID relief debate that Democrats cannot afford to undershoot this one. They cannot afford to go small, and they have to go big. And that's a big part of what he told me as well just a few hours ago when I interviewed him. I believe we have the quote. Can we put it up on the screen? I just want to read a little bit of what he had told me. He talked about how important it is that Democrats are able to deliver on this because in his view, if they do, this could be a turning point that prevents future demagogues and autocrats. His words, he mentioned people like Donald Trump from gaining power. He argues that those kinds of figures gain power when people lose faith in government. And he said the Democrats' job here is to restore faith in government, make people believe that it can do good for them so Democrats can stay in power.
All right, Sahil Kapoor. Old fights from 2009 still have relevance today in 2021. We did get a COVID relief bill passed today, though. Some big news from Capitol Hill. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
President Biden will sign the American Rescue Plan Friday afternoon. The White House making that announcement today.
We'll be emphasizing a number of components that are in the package and really having a conversation. This is important to the president personally, having a conversation directly with people about how they can benefit, addressing questions they have, even taking their feedback on implementation.
Joining me now, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Mike, after President Biden signs this bill on Friday, how is the White House planning to have that conversation with the American people about the benefits in this package?
Well, Alison, I've been telling you for a couple days now that we should expect to see President Biden hitting the road even after this legislation is passed, which of course it now is, to continue to talk about what's in it, to celebrate it, to tout it to the American public. And we just in the last few moments have learned the first destination for that roadshow. President Biden next Tuesday will head up to Delaware County, Pennsylvania. Of course, that state, so critical, was the one that put him over. 270 electoral votes made him president of the United States. So a little bit of symbolism there, in addition to the fact that, of course, it is Joe Biden's home state as the native of Scranton. But this is indicative of what top White House official Jen O'Malley Dillon says in a new memo that the NBC News has obtained, in which she talks about the importance of Democrats continuing to message this bill and talking about the fact that they have been arguing all along that this is something with broad bipartisan support, even if Republicans in Washington haven't supported it. And they said they're, in addition to the president, the vice president traveling, expect to see them activate a group of what she called 400 supportive local elected officials, mayors, governors, and others, including some Republicans, to be part of that messaging as well. Biden last week, when he was trying to rally Democrats in the House to continue to support this legislation, said something about his experience with the 2009 stimulus, as we're all looking back a decade or more to that experience, which has really shaped the way the White House thinks about this. And he talked about the fact that after they passed the Recovery Act early in their Obama-Biden administration, as he put it, President Obama was too modest to take a victory lap, that economists were saying that legislation helped rescue the country from going into an even deeper recession, but they didn't talk about it, and they still, as Sahil just talked about, punished Democrats for it. So very clear lesson learned, and something we'll see in the weeks ahead.
Mike, it's so funny. As you said, Sahil talking about how this is coming up in Congress. You're mentioning how this is coming up with President Biden. I happen to be reading President Obama's memoir, and I'm just in that portion of the book. It just kind of feels like, is this 2009 or is this 2021? What is going on? But we do know some aspects of history repeat themselves, and certainly President Biden trying to make sure he does that victory lap this time around. He hosted leaders from Johnson & Johnson and Merck today, and they announced an agreement that the White House is going to buy 100 million more doses of J&J's vaccine. What does this do for our vaccine supply?
Well, already the Biden administration was touting the fact that with previously announced deals with Moderna and Pfizer, that they were going to have enough supply by May to be able to say that all eligible American adults would be able to be vaccinated, moving up their timeline. And so what this new announcement from Johnson & Johnson, I think, gives the administration, as one top official put it earlier today, some greater flexibility, especially because it's a single-dose vaccine, to reach some of the harder-to-reach communities. That's so important as they try to make sure this is equitably distributed to the country. Now, as we talk about Biden trying to show that he meant what he said about unity, bringing people together, he talked a little bit today at an event with those two CEOs of rival pharmaceutical companies about how this partnership came together. Take a listen.
You know, when I came into office, we began working with the team of J&J to accelerate and add capacity to their manufacturing and production efforts. And it quickly became clear that Merck, one of the world's leading vaccine manufacturers, was in a position to be the partner we needed in this effort, in this wartime effort. And it's not just Johnson & Johnson and Merck. Pfizer, Moderna also work closely with us to help speed up the delivery of millions more doses.
And so, of course, Allison, we expect to hear more from the president tomorrow in that primetime address, talking about all the difficulties of the past year this country has been through since those lockdowns a year ago, but also some of the bright spots ahead. So expect to hear him talk about in more practical ways how this newly passed recovery plan, rescue plan, will mean a better ability to get vaccinations out to the American public.
All right, Mike, some positive news on COVID, but the White House also dealing with the situation on the border, giving an update today. What is the Biden administration doing to address the influx of migrants that we are seeing at our southern border?
Yeah, you said it, Allison. Even as they're touting this legislative accomplishment today, they're very much aware of what Republicans are out there criticizing the administration over their handling of the situation at the border, and an indication of just how much heat the White House is feeling. They brought one of their policy experts to the briefing room today, Roberta Jacobson. She's the former ambassador to Mexico and now is sort of the border czar for the administration. And she tried to really, in a more high-profile way, sell the administration's argument that this is a broader crisis that's not necessarily of their own making. Take a listen to what she had to say.
I want to be clear. Neither this announcement nor any of the other measures suggest that anyone, especially children and families with young children, should make the dangerous trip to try and enter the U.S. in an irregular fashion. The border is not open. Going forward, we will continue to look for ways to provide legal avenues in the region for people needing protection while we continue to enforce our laws.
Now, in a situation of maybe two steps forward, one step back, there was a moment during her comments to the press today where Jacobson spoke in Spanish, and she first said in Spanish that the border is not closed. An aide handed a note to her. She saw it and then quickly tried to clean that up to say in Spanish that the border is not closed. But clearly it's important for the administration to try to message to those who might think that the policies are more lax at this point, it's easier to get into the U.S., that there is still going to be border enforcement as they try to manage this influx at the border. Allison.
Mike, I have one last question for you that has absolutely nothing to do with anything but my own curiosity. When we speak to you in this particular live shot, I often hear music in the background. I believe... I think it was Jeff Bennett, I might be wrong, once told us on a day that it was particularly loud that there was a guy outside with a boombox. And I just have to ask, I can hear the music today. Is there a guy out there with a boombox, or am I just hearing other ambient music today? Because if so, that guy is really impressive.
You know, Allison, the weather is nice. I thought you might enjoy a little bit of some sort of smooth jazz, a little bit of light rock. And so maybe I'd put a little bit of musical accompaniment out on H Street just to sort of lighten the mood, celebrate the good weather.
You are so good to me, and I thank you for that, my friend. If it happens to be when you look out there, though, that boombox guy, tell him we are so impressed. Like, that is, I think we asked Jeff about this like 2 months ago, so if it's still that guy, I'm impressed.
I'll get you a real update on that. You got it.
Appreciate it. Texas rolling back key coronavirus restrictions today. Businesses can now open at full capacity and masks are no longer required. But just because everything can fully reopen doesn't necessarily mean that it will. Here's NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky from Dallas.
Yeah, Allison, with the past year being especially brutal for bars and restaurants, you would think there would be more excitement about the end of that mask mandate and the expansion to 100% capacity in Texas. But some of the others we spoke to are actually concerned. and are keeping a very close eye on how things go.
A Texas-sized test on pandemic policies.
They don't need government to tell them what to do. They know exactly what to do.
Governor Greg Abbott ordering all businesses back open, dropping the statewide mask mandate, and stressing COVID numbers are the lowest they've been in months. Not low enough for some.
I think it's much too early.
Now business owners are left to figure out their own plans. At Ascension Coffee in Dallas, they're back to 100% capacity, but mask policies here aren't changing. Manager Shane Obar cautiously optimistic.
My biggest concern is that people are going to not take this pandemic seriously.
In Houston, when Pico's Mexican restaurant announced its mask-on policy wasn't changing, some threatened to call immigration on employees. In Austin, the city using a public health mandate to override the governor's order. The mayor saying leaders should look to the science and data. Texas, one of more than a dozen states now without mask mandates. In California, stadiums reopening in weeks with restrictions. And Disneyland saying it'll welcome back visitors by late April for the first time in more than a year. Disney World in Florida, open since last summer, fully booked through next week. The state already facing spring break crowds, with beaches filling up and few masks in sight. From coast to coast, more kids returning to the classroom, some for the first time all year.
Beginning to welcome some of our students back is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel.
And with the governor's executive order going into effect today, at least one Texas mayor is speaking out against it. Sylvester Turner, the mayor of Houston, says that after detecting the UK COVID variant in the wastewater there, this is the wrong time to make this decision, as it could potentially set up that city for spikes in COVID cases. Allison.
All right, time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone.
Hey, Allison, we're going to head over to Hawaii. They've actually been devastated by heavy rain and floods, forcing people to evacuate their homes. Check out these severe weather conditions in this video right here. And this weather is expected to last until Friday. The governor has declared a state of emergency. Well, the trial for 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse has been pushed back 7 months and could be delayed even longer. Rittenhouse is the teenager charged with killing 2 protesters at the Jacob Blake demonstrations in Kenosha last August. His trial, originally slated to begin this month, is delayed because both sides told the judge that they needed more time to prepare. Well, in Alabama, 33-year-old Joshua James was arrested for storming the Capitol on January 6th. James has been linked to the far-right militia group, the Oath Keepers. And in New York, a man awaiting trial for murder was accidentally released from custody on Rikers Island. Now authorities are on the hunt for 26-year-old Christopher Buggs, and they say they don't know how the mistake actually happened. Well, in some news out of the airline industry, American Airlines CEO and president announced today that thanks to Congress passing President Biden's American Rescue Plan, the company won't have to furlough 13,000 workers in April, as they had warned. Allison, that is definitely some good news. Hopefully we can all hop back on one of those things. Airplanes, remember those?
No. And you just reminded me, I think I have a credit with American Airlines that is probably no good anymore because I haven't been on a plane in so long. So I have to look into that one. But great to hear that people are not losing their jobs.
And check into that, actually, because a lot of airlines have been extending your credits and your elite status with the airlines. So you may get lucky.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Will this still be good when I decide to fly in 10 years, American Airlines? Thank you so much. When the pandemic started, people wondered if there would be a quarantine baby boom with couples spending way more time at home together. A year later, it looks like there actually might be a baby bust. NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen has more on how COVID-19 is affecting family planning.
Hey, Allison, planning for a family can be tough enough, but you add in a pandemic and things get really complicated. You're about to meet 2 families who shared with us their decision-making process as they planned to expand their families, plus expert advice on what to consider before adding a baby to the mix.
That bundle of joy. The sleepless nights, the dirty diapers, and of course, the snuggles. I love you. All part of welcoming a new baby to the family. Good morning. But for some couples, that dream now on pause because of the pandemic. The Brookings Institution predicts an estimated 300,000 fewer births this year due to the pandemic and the associated recession.
Is it a little counterintuitive to what everyone was expecting?
Exactly, yes.
Dr. Sue Varma is a board-certified psychiatrist.
What are some of the trends you are noticing when it comes to conversations around family planning?
Are we going to be able to afford this baby? Financial pressures are huge because people have lost jobs. Second thing is, do we even want to have a child right now when we're struggling with the child or children that are already at home? There's heightened tension in the home and people are really not feeling connected.
That exact conversation playing out on parenting websites and Facebook groups across the internet.
We decided to wait because of the pandemic.
Dawn Gonzalez from California relied on the parenting website The Baby Center to help her navigate this uncertain time.
Having been pregnant twice, I already know what the toll is.
For Dawn and her husband Yang Lee, a doctor who treats COVID patients, the decision to temporarily hold off on having a third child wasn't easy.
How do you feel about the decision that you made?
There is a lot of emotion behind it. There's a lot of regret behind it, too. It takes out a lot of the room for hope that we had about how soon we could be complete as a family.
She's not the only one who waited. Freeze Health, a free fertility service that helps women decide if, when, and where to freeze their eggs, experienced a 250% spike in searches for egg freezing from April 2020 to January 2021. If you're unsure if now is the right time to grow your family, Dr. Varma says, ask yourself this.
Are we financially ready? Are we emotionally ready as individuals? Do we have enough family support? And is our marriage or our relationship in a good place right now?
We're in a really good, strong place.
Newlyweds John and Katie Phillips asked those questions, and the answers led them to yes.
We had kind of talked through all the big things about family and how we wanted to raise kids.
How do you think the pandemic has affected your family planning?
I don't think we thought twice about getting pregnant during this time.
In January, they welcomed Lila Quinn.
Hi, sweetheart.
What were some of the challenges that you had during the pregnancy?
Not having family close by. It was a lot more virtual. So I'd say that was challenging.
I'm not excited to go back to the office because it's been really sweet being home.
As for Dawn and her husband, who delayed having another child,
when do you think you'll be ready to have your third child?
We're hoping for the next child to be 2022.
And we all know having a child is a deeply personal decision. Dr. Varma says she likes to tell her patients, use practical optimism. Be hopeful, be optimistic, but also be prepared and have those conversations before the baby comes. Allison?
The pandemic adding a whole new layer of stress for new and expecting moms. NBC News senior Washington correspondent and pandemic mom herself, Hallie Jackson, has the story.
She's making sounds.
That's Willa, almost 4 months old.
Hi, sweet girl.
Born November of 2020, and when her mom, Stephanie Russo, got home from the hospital, she figured her sore throat came from yelling during labor. But after she lost her sense of taste and smell, she knew.
Our first outing as a family of four was to drive over to the COVID testing center, which is just, ridiculous.
Russo tested positive. So did her husband. Their toddler, Doc, got sick a couple days later. They believe the baby had COVID too, at just 4 days old. And that's not all.
I don't know how many of the nurses, but I know it was at least a handful of them also caught it.
So it was you, Nick, Doc, Willa, the doctor who delivered Willa, at least a couple of the nurses, your mom and your dad?
Actually, now that I say that, when Willa was 2 days old, I had to take her to the pediatrician, and this is before I had been tested. The nurse, who's actually quite a good friend of mine, also caught it.
Russo spent the first 3 weeks of Willa's life sick in bed, wondering what this might mean for her newborn and for herself.
It was a very frightening time. It was a really hard way to introduce a new member to the family.
So many pregnant women and new moms are grappling with similar kinds of questions about how safety and stress in the age of COVID affect their kids. Questions I definitely understand.
This is a ball.
As a pandemic mom myself.
0. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands.
Monroe was born just a week before the world shut down last March.
I feel the anxiety that comes with just generally being a first-time mom on top of the incredible stress of living in a pandemic and trying to stay safe.
I mean, we're hearing that across all race, ethnicities, all socioeconomic groups. The levels of anxiety are really higher than anything we have ever seen before.
Laura Jalif-Pawlowski leads a study on pregnant and nursing women at UCSF, finding this winter 60% of women had so much stress it affected how they functioned, and different communities felt it in different ways.
There are pregnant women among us, women of color in low-income communities who were already at increased risk of adverse outcomes. This was just one more thing on top of them.
Talking about the mental health impact is the first step. Dr. Matish Lachwayo-Davis understands what stress is like as an infectious diseases doctor and a mom of two.
I was 7 months pregnant when the pandemic broke. May hits. I'm about to have my baby, and the statistics around Black Maternal Fetal Health Week hit. So I'm bombarded with the statistics that say people that look like me will die at higher rates than white women. And then 2 weeks after that, I had my baby girl. 2 weeks after that, George Floyd died.
She knows she's the best mom to her children, but even she struggled at times with the guilt so many working moms feel.
Wellness and mental health support, specifically in communities like mine. This has to be normalized.
There is a stigma around some of this discussion about how hard it is to be a mom, especially a mom in a pandemic, and that we can't just self-care our way out of it.
You are not an island, and it's a very toxic idea to put the burden of getting through this alone. You cannot pour into other people from an empty cup.
And Hallie joins me live now. Hallie, I just have to start by saying, Monroe, cruising around like that. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it.
Where does the time go? It's such a cliche, but it flies by so fast, girl. I know.
I can only imagine. Something really stood out to me in your piece. Much like the virus itself, the mental health impact on new moms is disproportionately affecting women of color. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, this was something that Laura Jalif-Pawlowski, who you saw in that piece, the researcher doing that study at UCSF, made a point to talk to me about, because she said, listen, these are women, women of color, some women in low-income communities, for example, who are already facing a number of burdens unrelated to the pandemic itself, right? Like, for example, we know that Black women and other women of color face scarier statistics when it comes to maternal mortality, for example, food insecurity, issues related to income as well. So you add all of that up, the pandemic makes it even worse, right? So she said, everybody's kind of starting already in a bit of a hole because of the pandemic, but you have to remember that there are equity issues surrounding this, and that is such an important piece to the puzzle as well, Al.
So what's the biggest struggle, or one of the biggest struggles for new moms right now, and what resources are available to them? Maybe resources they don't even know about.
Yeah, I think the anxiety piece of it, is what you heard about there, is one of them, at least from the sort of anecdotal reporting that we've done and what you've seen in some of the research around this. I should note, too, by the way, both those moms that you met in that story are doing really well now. Steph Russo, whose whole family dealt with COVID, says they are healthy. They're doing great. She's actually looking forward to the light at the end of the tunnel with the pace of vaccinations picking up. Oh. Dr. Davis says, and I thought this was beautiful, that she was humbled, she says, by the resilience that she saw in her 10-month-old daughter. She's actually drawing strength from her family. So one resource could be, your own family members. Another really important one is community, Allison. This is something that we heard again and again. Yeah. The idea that the isolation, new moms hear this, right? If you're pregnant, you hear it all the time. Don't isolate yourself in your bubble after you have your baby. It's important to have your sort of village or your community. That goes tenfold in the age of COVID, even if that community is virtual. The good news is that some of the research that we showed you also found that a lot of women, about 80% roughly, did have some kind of community, reported being able to have some kind of a community to talk to, family, friends, some kind of an outlet, which is a good thing. And that's something that is really important in this time, even with, Allison, light at the end of the tunnel, as we said.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Hallie, it is wonderful to hear those moms are doing well. Dr. Davis is a big friend of News Now. She's just absolutely incredible.
Is. Yeah.
As are you. She's the best, as are you, for doing these stories. They are important for moms, expecting moms, women who are thinking about moms, women in general. These stories are so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're not going to be ultimately safe until the world is safe. And so we're going to start off making sure Americans are taken care of first, but we're then going to try to help the rest of the world. Thank you.
Let's bring in emergency medicine physician Dr. Derek Cass. Dr. Cass, great to see you. First of all, why is it important or a good thing for the U.S. to be oversupplied during this rollout?
So, of course, the idea that we have multiple vaccines available for different reasons, one-dose vaccine, two-dose vaccines available for all Americans who want to get vaccinated now as early as May is remarkable. But the idea that we could have a surplus of vaccination so that we could then help the other neighboring countries, low-income countries all around the world start to implement their vaccine programs is really what America should be doing. It is our role as a leader, a world leader, that we can help, launch vaccination programs around the world with the surplus that we'll have in this country.
How would you like to see those potential extra doses distributed? Is there a right and a wrong way that we can go about this?
So I think that once we see what doses we have, we see their storage capacity. Remember that certain vaccines like the Pfizer is going to have different storage capacity than the Johnson & Johnson. So we need to look at the places that we're going to send the vaccine, what the capacity is there, and then lean into the experts on the ground in countries that know what the country needs, what that infrastructure has. There are a lot of people that have been doing this work for a very, very long time. It's not about really a right way or a wrong way. It's just making sure that we get as many resources mobilized together and that we really lean into partners that have been doing this work to make sure that we start in a very deliberate fashion as soon as possible.
Dr. Walensky reminded us that the CDC's guidelines for fully vaccinated people do not include traveling just yet. Here's what she said at today's COVID briefing.
Currently, 90% of people are still unprotected and not yet vaccinated. So we are really looking forward to updating this guidance as we have more protection across the communities and across the population.
We know people are traveling, though. The TSA screened more than 800,000 travelers yesterday. We're hearing Disney's Orlando theme parks are sold out next week, according to its website. Are you concerned about a spring break surge in cases coming up?
What I'm concerned about is that people who aren't vaccinated are going to start acting like they are vaccinated. And that's really the difference here. Yeah. Part of the reason we hold back on the recommendations for vaccinated people, maybe in regards to travel or other guidance, is that we don't want to open the floodgates for people that are overinterpreting that for themselves. Maybe it's somebody who had COVID last year who's not vaccinated, who can still consider themselves protected, or somebody that's hesitant to get vaccinated but doesn't want to miss out on the opportunity to go to Disney World. So I think we're going to start seeing the guidance for vaccinated people change in regards to travel, but it's going to be really, really important that we have enough self-control to wait until we are double vaccinated if we're in one of the mRNA vaccines or single vaccinated for the Johnson & Johnson before we take those liberties onto ourselves, because safety is paramount and you don't want to get COVID while you're on a trip.
Realistically, we know that people who aren't vaccinated at all are getting on planes. What safety tips do you have for people who are still planning to travel? Is there a smart way to do it if you absolutely must get on a plane or you must go somewhere?
So the first thing is, if you are not vaccinated yourself, please do not travel if you don't have to. There are going to be cases where you have to travel. A family member is ill, you have to do it for work. In that case, my recommendations are to double mask, to cover your eyes, whether that's a shield or goggles or glasses. Do not eat or drink on the plane if you can avoid it. And please don't take your mask off at any time if you can avoid it, unless you are in a closed space like in the bathroom or really 6 feet apart from anybody else. We want to make sure that people don't catch the COVID virus in transport to their destination. And please follow all testing guidance, all quarantine guidance if you do travel and you're unvaccinated. And right now, that guidance includes people that are vaccinated from PCR testing on both sides.
Dr. Cass, I'd love to talk to you about mental health in your field. 1 in 5 healthcare workers has experienced depression, anxiety, or PTSD during the pandemic, according to a new study. Many of those healthcare workers were treating the sickest patients, and now they're giving COVID vaccines. Are you noticing a shift in your colleagues? Are they more hopeful now, or is the stress level still really high?
So I will say from personal experience that vaccinating a human to this virus, being part of the team that reaches out, even as far as making appointments or actually sticking that needle in somebody's arm, is actually healing for the trauma that we've experienced over the past year. I would encourage anybody out there who wants to be part of this vaccination effort. And in New York City right now, we're hiring 2,000 people, not just healthcare workers, to be part of the vaccination efforts. It does help heal the trauma of the year. Yes, for healthcare workers, but also for regular Americans who've had to deal with quarantine and fear and maybe even losing a family member. So I do think that being part of this effort is healing for everybody. I do think the healthcare workforce, thanks to funding from the American Rescue Plan, is going to have some money to support healthcare workers for the PTSD that we're going to expect to see. But I think that everyone, if they can be part of the solution, it's just a gift that keeps giving, and I would encourage everyone to try and do it just a little bit.
Well, it is so wonderful to hear you say that it has been healing for you and for your colleagues. You have spent so much time healing the rest of us. Thank you for the important work that you do and for always coming on News Now to see us.
No problem.
H.R. 1, the For the People Act, could change what voting in America looks like. It is a top priority for Democrats this year. So what's in the massive, nearly 800-page bill? NBCNews.com senior reporter Jane Tim takes a look.
One of Democrats' top legislative priorities this year is rethinking how America votes. Last week, they passed H.R. 1 For the People Act out of the House. It's the first step in what's sure to be an all-out fight over how American elections should operate. The goal of the legislation is to improve access, particularly for voters of color, and curb the power of big donors in the system. Democrats say it's critical legislation.
This reminds me of what it must have felt like at Valley Forge. Everything is at stake.
Republicans? Not so much.
Everything about this bill is rotten to the core. This is a bill as if written and held by the devil himself.
Advocates say the bill would stop gerrymandering, restrictive voting laws, and fundamentally make American elections more fair. Now, the bill is 791 pages long, so let's take a look at some of the biggest proposals. Much of the bill works to make it easier for people to register and to vote. The bill would put voter registration systems online, allow voters to register the day they vote, and create automatic voter registration for voters who are already interacting with government systems. So a lot of people would be registered to vote without doing anything. And those who aren't, they could register at the polls. As for voting, the bill requires states to offer 15 days of early voting for 10 hours a day and mail voting to anybody who wants to use it. When you do vote in person, the bill says the line at the polls should not be longer than 30 minutes. Now, some states already run elections like this, but the idea of the bill is to create a federal floor, guardrails that all voters can rely on, no matter where they live and vote. Another big change the bill would bring: restoring voting rights of felons. There's an estimated 5.2 million Americans who are barred from voting due to a felony conviction. This bill says once you're out of prison, you can vote. And that would put about 2.2 million people back on the rolls, nearly 1 million of those in Florida alone. Another big change: redistricting. The bill bans partisan gerrymandering, the process of drawing district maps that benefit one party or another. This bill says states must let independent commissions and not lawmakers draw the district maps every 10 years. Advocates say this could be transformative, creating more competitive races and making politicians more accountable to their voters. Another big change: the bill creates public financing options for congressional campaigns, and it updates the outdated presidential bid financing system. These systems would limit how much money candidates can get from big donors, too. The bill also seeks to beef up election cybersecurity, ethics rules, and a whole lot more. It heads to the Senate next, where its chances are incredibly slim, as Republicans argue against this much federal oversight in state-run elections. Democrats, with their razor-thin majority, would have to eliminate the filibuster if they want to pass this or any other voting rights legislation. But with Republicans introducing and advancing restrictive election proposals across the country, the fight for voting rights may well come down to: do they want to keep the filibuster or their congressional majorities?
The League of United Latin American Citizens, aka LULAC, suing Iowa over new voting restrictions the state signed into law on Monday. This new law cuts early voting from 29 days to 20, requires that most mail-in ballots be received by Election Day, and closes voting sites an hour early. The Iowa legislature passed that measure with only Republican votes. Democrats and advocacy groups say it'll make it harder for minority, elderly, and disabled voters to cast their ballots. LULAC's suit is claiming that this new law creates an undue burden on the fundamental right to vote. Joe Henry is political director for the League of United Latin American Citizens Iowa. He joins me now. Joe, your suit calls this law an exercise in voter suppression, one disguised as a solution for a problem that exists only in the fertile imaginations of its creators. What a description there. Why do you think Iowa's legislature passed this law, and how specifically does this target Latino voters?
Well, I think it clearly targets Latino voters and all people of color. 15% of the voters in Iowa are from communities of color. That is a big number. So this is a target to our communities. We have many young people, especially in the Latino community. Our median age is 23 years of age. To reduce early voting and the hours to vote on Election Day, after we had a record-breaking year of turnout last year, we had many more Latinos who voted last year. Many people from the Black community, the Asian community, the Indigenous community. So 15% of Iowa voters would be impacted on this. And we feel that this will actually impact all Iowans.
In a statement, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds said all of these additional steps promote more transparency and accountability. First, I would like to get your reaction to that. And then how do you think we can bring more transparency and accountability to our voting systems?
Well, I think we have total transparency. That was stated last year when the former president was waging a war across the country. There were 60 lawsuits that he and his campaign put forth. All of them were denied by the states and the National U.S. Supreme Court. So we have this security, we have transparency, but here we have voter suppression. Over 200 bills have been launched across the country in over 40 states, similar to this bill in Iowa. And again, this is an attack on communities of color. We see this clearly. We are a young community, and this should not happen. We are looking forward to our day in court to make sure that we lay out all the information, all the facts, but the facts are already there. Even Secretary of State Paul Pate stated last year that we had a secure election, that there was no fraud. So again, this makes no sense. Reducing early voting and the hours of voting on the day of the election, that makes no sense. This is voter suppression. It's very clear to us and many people in Iowa.
I know this battle isn't just about lawsuits. How are LULAC and other civil rights groups fighting limits on voting rights, fighting voter suppression, besides going to court? What else are you doing in the community?
Well, we're educating folks in the community. We're urging them to be aware. We're also urging our people to contact their legislators, the governor, Congress, senators, representatives, to really urge everybody to speak out. And of course, we have H.R. 1 that's being put forth in Congress. We're looking forward to getting that passed. I mean, this is unbelievable that we're having to fight something that was fought for during the civil rights movement. This is a modern day Jim Crow type of law. This should not be happening. This is what happened to the Black community during the civil rights period. This should not be happening now. We're supposed to be a country of democracy. This should not be allowed. The Republicans, the conservatives should not be putting forth a bill like this. They should be applauding democracy. They should be acknowledging the security of the elections that were held last year, and of course here in Iowa.
Joe, thanks so much for the work that you do, and thanks for coming on News Now to talk to us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jury selection in the Derek Chauvin murder trial moving along today. Attorneys questioning potential jurors, at least 5 of them seated so far. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster has more from outside the courthouse in Minneapolis.
Allison, we are really just watching this process roll along, and we're feeling like we're getting to the point where we're almost halfway there. You know, the goal is to get 12 jurors and 2 alternates, and that's what we've been watching play out over the course of the day during this day 2 of jury selection. And what we've been seeing each potential juror come up to the stand. The judge we'll give them some instructions and ask them a couple of questions about that questionnaire that we continue to talk about, the 14-page questionnaire where jurors asked or answered some questions before they even got to the courthouse. And then it's up to the attorneys. The defense will come up, ask some questions. The prosecution will ask some questions, and each of them have the opportunity to dismiss that potential juror. So that is what we've been going through, and that's what we've been watching. And of course, the racial makeup of the potential jury is something that's truly high of mind for both sides and for many people watching this trial. What we know so far from based on yesterday and early morning today is most of the juries that have been seated so far is male. So it's a majority male jury. We know that earlier today, the second person of color was added to the jury pool there. So this is something that's going to continue to develop throughout the afternoon. Now, as this jury selection process is happening, of course, there is still that cloud of uncertainty over whether or not the former police officer, Derek Chauvin, will be charged and will have to face trial for that third-degree murder charge. That's, of course, the charge that the state has been trying to put on. The trial judge dismissed back in October, but now it's in the hands of the Minnesota Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. And if a ruling comes down from one of them, that can really upend what we're seeing now. But the trial judge has said he's going to continue along with this process until one of those higher appellate courts tells him to stop. So that's what we'll continue to watch. We're watching the impaneling of this jury as we hit day 2 of jury selection in the trial against Derek Chauvin.
A dozen women are now accusing rapper T.I. and his wife Tiny of sexual assault and other misconduct. The couple's attorney denying the claims, but a lawyer representing more than half of the accusers now calling for charges. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce asked that attorney about the allegations.
T.I.'s decorated music career includes a slew of chart-topping hits, Grammy Awards, and multiple TV shows. But a series of disturbing sexual assault allegations against the Atlanta rapper and his wife Tamika Harris threatened to topple the empire they've built.
We are dead set on seeking justice.
New York attorney Tyrone Blackburn represents 9 anonymous women who say the Harrises drugged, sexually assaulted, and in some cases kidnapped them. And while each encounter is different, a troubling alleged pattern emerges.
You have Tamika Harris being the main catalyst that gets the woman to trust her.
Several of the accusers say Tamika Harris handpicked them in crowded nightclubs and fed them spiked drinks that hindered their cognitive abilities.
Then T.I. comes along with his touching, prodding, offering of different narcotics, whether it's Molly, ecstasy, cocaine.
Blackburn says many of his clients then passed out and woke up naked with sore genitals. One victim, as young as 17 years old, alleges she was working for the Harrises as an intern in 2006 when they raped her on a tour bus.
And there's blood running down her legs. She's laying naked on the bed next to 2 other interns.
The accusations against T.I. and Tamika Harris span 15 years in Georgia and California, with the most recent incident allegedly taking place in 2018, according to Blackburn. Beyond the sexual assault allegations, 3 of Blackburn's clients, 2 women and 1 man, say T.I. or his associates threatened them with violence. And Los Angeles attorney Lisa Bloom says she represents 2 women who endured misconduct at the hands of T.I., Tamika, or both.
The egregious allegations that's been tossed around about me and my wife.
T.I. denied all of the allegations on Instagram.
Whatever we ever have done has been done with consensual adults who into what we into and like what we like. We ain't never made nobody do anything. We ain't never trafficked anything. Well, sexually trafficked anything.
T.I. and Tamika's lawyer released this statement to NBC News. Quote, "The Harrises continue to deny in the strongest possible terms these groundless and unjustified allegations. We fully expect if the claims are thoroughly and fairly investigated, no charges will be brought."
How are you doing?
An early sign of fallout for the couple. VH1 halted production of their reality show, T.I. and Tiny, The Family Hustle, back in February, given, quote, the serious nature of the allegations. Blackburn says he's asked 2 federal agencies and the Georgia Attorney General's office to consider charges against the Harrises.
These women may have consented to come to the VIP section, but once you've introduced narcotics into their system and you've taken away their ability to make a sound decision, they can no longer consent.
The Georgia AG told NBC News they take the allegations, quote, very seriously. The U.S. Attorney's Office for Northern Georgia, however, declined to comment. As for the Harrises' alleged victims, Blackburn says many of his clients' lives are ruined and that severe depression, drug addiction, and suicidal thoughts continue to haunt them.
These women can never get their lives back, but what they can do is begin to start healing once they know that the man and the woman that violated them, the Harrises, are seeking justice and are paying for the sins that they've committed.
The royal family facing intense pressure to address Meghan and Harry's allegations over race and mental health beyond the brief statement from the Queen. Here's what NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter heard from people in the UK.
I applaud their bravery and their honesty, and I think their fortitude as a couple is amazing.
Do you feel that's very clear, that the headlines were racist, that the headline, Do you feel like the coverage of Meghan while she was here, separate from her wedding, was racist?
Yes. I feel like it's bad how they treated Meghan and Harry, you know what I mean?
Do you think for a lot of black Brits that wouldn't have been shocking?
Yeah, it wouldn't have been. People should realize, even though it might not be as bad as in America, but there's still a lot of racism in this country. So those are the things you should kind of expect from the royal family.
You don't think there's going to be an investigation or anything public?
It's the Queen, man. It's the Queen and her family. I don't think so.
I think it's quite typically British, the way everyone is quite, we have an expression, is quite topical at the moment. However, I think it will be tomorrow's fish wrapping paper. Tabloids here to crucify everyone. That's the way it is.
I thought it was pretty shocking. Obviously, there are things that you have to listen to. So I think you've got to take the mental health stuff seriously. But bottom line is, I think Meghan has an agenda.
They shouldn't want to pick and choose when they will engage with the press and when they won't. Is kind of my view.
One of the other views is that they want this quiet life, but they've got a Netflix deal. They've got Oprah.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.